Tonight we're going to start a new series on anger, and I'm going to include in it abuse and conflict resolution. So it'll be about 8 weeks long if everything goes to kind of how I planned it. But what I want to do tonight is kind of introduce you to this topic, and I think most of you know that it's a very important topic. I deal with people every day, and what I've learned over the years is that anger for people who are in recovery is one of the biggest relapse triggers. So most addicts at some point in time have got angry at somebody, and that's triggered them to want to go use or drink, either to punish that person. I'll show you, I'll hurt you by getting drunk, which means I'll hurt you by hurting me. And they do that, or they go and use just because that's where their brain wants to go to kind of get over the anger. So it's a massive issue for most people in recovery. And so that's why I want to talk about it, because I've seen just how big of an issue it is. But I want to bring into this whole discussion not just what you would normally hear in an anger management course, but I want you to understand how complex trauma makes this anger issue multiple times more difficult to deal with. And so I'm going to give you the kind of the cold facts up front. If you're from complex trauma, you've got anger issues, and they're going to be even more difficult to deal with. But I hope we can move to some tools that you find very helpful in beginning to deal with this area of your life. What I do when I begin teaching, we do a whole week on anger at React. What I do at the very beginning is just start asking questions and making comments to help people get in touch with their own anger issues. So I get a lot of people that will say they've been angry for as long as they can remember. They're just not sure why. But then I'll get just as many people who will say, I don't have any anger. And I go, wow, they've probably got tons of anger that they are so disconnected from that they're not even aware that that anger is probably influencing all kinds of decisions they make on a regular basis. And so a lot of people from complex trauma have shut down their anger system, or they think they have, and they don't think it is an issue. I hope by the end of the night that you'll realize that you're angry, and I know you'll probably be angry at me for pointing out that you got anger issues, and I've got used to that. Some who are aware of their anger issues are afraid of their own anger, and they are afraid that if their anger gets triggered, where it might take them. And so that for them makes this a very important topic. And what I have seen is when it comes to guilt in people dealing with trauma and who are in recovery from addiction, their greatest amount of guilt usually comes from stuff they did while they were in the problem, using what they did to their kids, etc. But the second greatest cause of guilt is usually what they've done when they've been angry. Things they've said, things they've done to their kids, to their partner, to friends, to family, that they can't take back. And the damage has been done, and they see the damage, and it causes a ton of guilt. So that tells me further that this anger subject is an important one, because most people aren't controlling it very well and are doing things that they deeply regret the next day. But it's too late to take it back. What makes it difficult in complex trauma is that when you get triggered to get angry, or something triggers your anger, you have a nanosecond in which to make a decision about how to respond. Because your anger in a nanosecond goes from 0 to 100, and you make decisions that take you in old pathways that are very hard to stop once that anger gets triggered. So your time to change is less than a nanosecond, which makes it super difficult to begin to deal with. So it becomes difficult just because of the trigger's speed and the intensity of the emotions that come in that nanosecond. That leads to the trigger stuff. If you're from complex trauma, you probably have hundreds of things that trigger your anger. If you get disrespected, and you could get disrespected hundreds of different ways, each one of those will trigger your anger. If there's injustice, it will trigger your anger. If somebody lies to you or cheats on you, that triggers your anger. You got trigger after trigger after trigger. So you have 2 good days and you think, I got my anger under control, and then in one day you get 5 triggers and you go through to the moon and back with your anger. That is how quickly it can get out of control, and there's just a lot of things that you have to deal with. It's not just the anger, it's all the triggers. And then some know that their anger at times, when it's triggered, has gone to the point of a black rage, where they don't even realize what they're doing. Their memory kind of blanks out. And then the next thing, and this is a key thing we're going to talk about tonight, is that in complex trauma, anger now pulls you in a negative direction. It pulls you in a negative direction in your thinking. You go to very dark thoughts. It pulls you in a negative direction in your behaviors. What is important for you to understand is that the design of anger was that it was to pull you in a good direction. It was to pull you into problem-solving mode and into positive actions. Complex trauma changes all of that. And so now when you're triggered, the force that you feel is super powerful, but it's all to negative things. And so you're fighting a current, a gravitational pull that is super strong and very hard to resist. Next, some people coming out of complex trauma find that they become addicted to their anger. They love it and hate it at the same time. They love the power that it gives them. They love the rush. They love how it intimidates others. They love a lot of things about it. So they hate the damage that it does, but part of them still needs it. And they become addicted to it, just like a drug. And so every morning they get their anger fixed when they wake up, and that gets them through the day. And then they have an anger hangover that night, as their brain gets all foggy and they just feel crappy. But it is like a drug for them. Some of you have so much addiction to anger and so much anger there that you go looking for a fight every morning. You just want to vent your anger. And so if you can't find a helpless driver going down Portage Ave or something else to get angry at, you go push buttons on people and you start to pick fights so you can vent your anger. And that's how deep the anger has become. Next one, anger at yourself. So we tend to think that anger is something that we direct outward at situations that aren't right or that people that are jerks. But when you come out of complex trauma, a good part of your anger is directed at yourself. And that can come from guilt, that can come from shame, that can come from all kinds of different things. But there's a ton of anger that has never been resolved towards yourself. So let me give you the questions that I would ask a group of React clients on their Tuesday morning with Tim. Scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being absolute none, 0, next to nothing, 10 being crazy, high, through the roof. How much anger was in your family of origin? Now, I don't want you to think just in terms of explosive anger with dad yelling and throwing things and hitting things. What I want you to think about is how much anger and tension and awkwardness did you sense? Because some of you just lived in constant fear and walked on eggshells for fear that somebody was going to get angry. There was so much tension in the air. So that would be a 9 or a 10 in your growing up world. So it could be violent anger. It could be just supercharged tension environment. Second question. As you look at your own life, in the past 10 years, on average, where would you put your anger? Zero anger, or living with the needle in the red, constantly ready to blow a fuse and explode at any moment? So that's an evaluation for you. And then, in the last 2 months of your life, where would you rank your anger? Would it be the same as your average over the last 10 years? Or is there a lot less anger in your life these days? Give yourself kind of a comparison point as you look at your own anger. And then, what has been your latest anger experience? Some of you, it was coming here tonight. Some of you, as soon as you saw somebody here tonight. Whatever. Some are agreeing with me on that. What I want you to understand is what triggered it and how intense did it get. So that's your latest thing to kind of tap into. Okay? So that's a bit of an overview, introduction around anger. Now let me kind of teach you some stuff. When I look at complex trauma, the main thing I want people to understand is there's really two types of anger that are connected with complex trauma. So I like to think of a volcano, and a volcano has all of the lava that is down below the surface, that is seething, bubbling away all the time, and then every once in a while there's an eruption. So anger 1 is the lava, anger 2 is the eruption. Okay? Most anger management courses focus on the eruption type of anger and how to control that. The difference with complex trauma is that the lava anger is the main issue. And unless you deal with the lava anger, you're going to keep erupting no matter how many courses you take. So understanding the lava anger is critical. Okay, the next piece is a lot of people say to me, I don't explode and erupt, so I must not have any lava. And I go, well, let's go to the next part of understanding anger. There's 4 different ways that we can express anger. So number 1 is the eruption, the violent, angry, where you yell things, you throw things, you hit people, you call people down, your language changes, it gets super cruel. All of that is explosion type anger. A lot of people think that that's the only type of anger, so they think if I don't explode, then I don't have anger problems. But there's 3 other types. So the next one is the stuffer. And that is the person that learned early on that if you express anger, you get punished. So bottle it up, push it down, stuff it deep inside of you, and then never express it. Now here's what I want you to understand. What we know now from suppressed anger emotions is it damages you physically. It damages your physical health. So people who are angry, people who stuffed all of that anger, usually end up with major health issues like high blood pressure, sleep problems, constantly irritable, all of those things, and it can go to migraine, headaches, and other health issues. They're now seeing a connection between cardiac or heart problems and anger problems, and even cancer issues and anger problems. So stuffed anger, you might think you have it under control, but if you've not resolved it, you've only stuffed it, you're setting yourself up as a ticking time bomb physically. Third type is you punish yourself. So part of what happens in complex trauma is if somebody's upset, you are made to think it's your fault. And then when you were told that it was your fault, you were then punished. And what you did is take your parents' critical voice and their critical response, and you do it to yourself now. So if somebody's upset, you go, I must have done something wrong, beat myself up. If you fail, if you disappoint somebody, if you don't do it as perfectly as you hoped, beat self up, beat self up. Now that can be the self-harm type of things. That can be engaging in risky behaviors where you are flirting with damaging yourself a lot, Or that can be just the voices in your head, calling yourself down, calling yourself names, predicting your future that you'll never amount to anything, not allowing yourself to be kind to yourself, but sticking yourself in the doghouse and punishing yourself for a while. That is anger turned inward, and it is super common in complex trauma people. Fourth, underhanded. Now let me say, just as you're processing this, most people will try all four of these. Some will end up picking all four, but they will go in a sequence. So you might start by stuffing stuff for a little bit, then you beat yourself up for a bit, then you're going to go to the next one, underhanded, and then you'll explode. Everybody will have their own style. Some will have only 3 of the 4, 2 of the 4, but you might have a predominant style or a predominant one of the 4 that is your main go-to. So the fourth one is the sneakiest one. It is where you are angry and express your anger, but you're not even aware that you're doing it, and they're not even aware that you're doing it. So let me give you an example. Sarcasm. What happens in sarcasm? You take a shot at a person, but you wrap it in humor. You make a joke out of it. And then they go, "Did you mean that?" And you go, no, I was just joking. Meanwhile, you're going, "Yes, I got him. That's what my intent was." So sarcasm is anger that's sneaky. It's underhanded. Another one is giving somebody the silent treatment. Or one-word answers. "How was your day?" "Fine." "You feeling okay?" "Yep." "Seems like something bothering you. Anything bothering you?" "Nope." "You want to talk about it?" "Nope." Now they're getting mad. And guess what you're saying? "You got anger issues. You should go and get some help." You now got them punished. And you can make it their problem. Or if you know somebody is always on time and they are religious about punctuality, and to them, when something is supposed to start at 7 o'clock, to them on time is 10 to 7. Well, you're mad at them. And they're giving you a ride. So you show up at 5 after 7. And they're mad, and you go, sorry, and you make up all kinds of excuses, but you know that they're really upset and you're happy inside because you got them. So there's all kinds of different things that we can do to punish others that are so sneaky, we might not even be aware that we're doing it, and they might not even be aware of what we're doing. So what I have found with a lot of people is that they are pros at underhanded. They just don't realize because they've never thought about it or been aware of it. And as they become aware of it, along with stuffing it and anger turned inward, they go, "I've got anger problems. Because I am angry about a lot of things, I just never explode. But it comes out very effectively in other ways." Okay, now let me bring in the complex trauma, which is the cause of the lava. So where does that lava that's bubbling away deep down inside of you and has been for many, many years, where did it come from? So this is the key point that I want you to understand. Anger was originally designed to be a good thing. Now that sounds strange to somebody from complex trauma because anger was always bad. Anger never led to anything good. It only led to more pain. And so it's hard to believe or even think that anger might be a good thing in certain situations. So here's how anger was designed to work. In us, we have this built-in, without even realizing it, moral system of what is love. And so we know that if you love somebody and want a healthy relationship, you have to be honest, you have to be reliable, You have to be faithful. You have to communicate. You have to respect each other. You have to be consistent and fair. That's built in. It's into our DNA. So if somebody lies, what do? We get angry. And what the anger is saying is, alert, 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 something is wrong here. That should not continue, because if it continues, it will damage this relationship and it will damage each other. So anger was designed, number one, to alert you that something was either unloving, disrespectful, unfair, and not true. And then the second thing, it was to give you the motivation to make it right again. And it was to give you the motivation to say, we got to talk about this, so that it could be resolved, so that the relationship would go back to honesty and fairness and consistency and reliability. So anger was a beautiful system that was designed to protect love and loving relationships. That's important. And secondly, anger was designed to be resolved, so that if something's unloving, it resolves it and then the anger goes away. There's no more need for it because it is resolved, okay? So that's the original design. And what helps that whole system is that when you are angry, your brain releases a chemical called cortisol. And that chemical is only released with anger and fear/stress, danger. Cortisol is the chemical that gives you the adrenaline rush. It gives you extra energy. It makes you hyper-focused. And it is saying, this has to get fixed. This has to get resolved. And it's giving you all the help possible to have the energy and the desire to resolve this, to return it to love. So what happens in complex trauma? You live with stuff not being fair. You live with lies and secrets. You live with unfaithfulness and lack of consistency and disrespect, and you're getting angry all the time as a kid because you're getting hurt, your needs aren't being met, you're trying to resolve it, and you get angry to want to resolve it, and what happens when you get angry? You get punished. You can't resolve it. So what is the only option available to a child who is feeling anger for all the right reasons, but they can't resolve the problem that's causing the anger, the problem that is the unloving behaviors? If they can't resolve it and they're being hurt for showing that anger, they got to stuff it down. They got to push it down, and that starts the formation of lava. And so lava is suppressed, healthy anger. That you were in a situation that in order to survive, your only option was to stuff. And that you learn how to do it. Now let me just say this. Some children who are maybe bigger and taller than other kids, they stuff their anger at home, but when they were outside of the home, they vented their anger. By bullying other kids, by mistreatment of property, arson, mistreatment of animals. But all of those things come from angry children who haven't been able to resolve their anger in a healthy way, so they start venting it to weaker things than they are. And so that describes many of you. Now here's what they're finding with trauma. That goes like this. When you feel anger, severe danger leads to anger, leads to adrenaline, leads to cortisol, all of those things that give you a supercharged response to what's going on inside of you. You go into full activation when you're in severe danger. Now what they're finding with people who have childhood trauma or PTSD from horrific events like war is they stay stuck in full activation mode. So now the slightest little thing that can happen that makes them anger, and they don't just respond a little bit, they respond in full activation mode. They flip. So the response doesn't match the trigger. And that's what many of you are now realizing, that you can be going through a day and all it takes is the tiniest little thing that annoys you and you lose it. And you go into very dangerous places with dangerous behavior. Next thing I want you to think about with complex trauma. Many children from complex trauma live with the frustration that nobody ever heard them. They tried to express themselves. They hoped their parents wanted to get them. And they tried hard to engage them in conversation, to talk about their world and how they see the world. Nobody got them. Nobody heard them. And so the only way they could get heard was to get angry. And that became a big thing for them, was I got to blow up before anybody will listen to me. So anger became a necessary thing to try to get your needs met and to get heard. Next thing is what we said about anger. And so what I want you to see is, do you see that anger's original design was to pull you in a positive direction? It was to get you to fix love violations and return relationships to healthy. Now, anger pulls you in a negative direction. So you want to know what happens now? You get angry, you want to hurt the people in your relationship. You want to destroy further the relationship. So it pulls you in the opposite direction. It pulls you to do more unloving things rather than more loving things. And that is where the damage comes. Now, one of the things that I ask clients all the time to be aware of is this. What is your emotional default setting? And what I mean by that is, if you're not working on yourself, where do you end up emotionally? So a lot of people, when they think about that, they go, if I'm not doing work on myself and not aware of myself, I end up depressed, full of anxiety and anger. And I'm dead inside otherwise. So anger for most people out of complex trauma is their default setting. That's where you will gravitate towards if you're not working on yourself. So the final piece that I want you to see here is, I think the greatest way to understand complex trauma is that complex trauma's greatest damage is to your identity. And we call it shame. So instead of seeing yourself as valuable and a loving, valuable person, you see yourself as not valuable, not lovable. Your identity, instead of being positive, becomes negative. And so one way to understand shame is that as shame builds in your life, it requires you to be angry at yourself. Because you don't like that you're unlovable. You hate that you don't have any value for who you are, or at least that's what you think, though that is not true. But that's what you think is true. And so your anger naturally turns inward because of shame and complex trauma. So what I do with clients all the time is I put on the board, who are the people that you've been angry with? So they'll start with partner, parents, family, friends. Then they'll go to authorities, cops, bosses, CFS, etc. Then that'll go to God. He's the ultimate authority. And then it'll go to self. And then they begin to realize, I'm basically mad at everything. That's what my world has become. I'm mad at me, I'm mad at the world, and everything in it. And that is a very sad place to live. So that's where the lava comes from. Now let me take it one more piece for tonight. Kids growing up in complex trauma, when they begin to realize everybody's angry, but nobody's using it to create loving relationships, to fix problems, they start taking notes on other uses of anger. And they begin to adopt those uses in their own life. Because they find that anger is an amazing shield and an amazing weapon. It enables them to accomplish a lot of things that they normally wouldn't be able to accomplish. So quickly, let me give you some of the misuses of anger that develop within complex trauma that probably you have picked up. So some of these you can check off, and if you check off all of them, you need to come to the rest of the sessions. So number one, many realize that when you come up in complex trauma, you have a lot of anger, but you're afraid of angry people. They scare you. So you go, if I want to manipulate people, I should get angry, and they're going to be afraid of me, and they're going to give me whatever I want. They're going to say, just do whatever you want, just don't be angry. And you've won. And so that can go even further. Anger is not just good for manipulation through intimidation, it's good for control. So many families of complex trauma, the thing that kept the kids somewhat in line was not that they were loved, it was they're afraid of dad's anger. So fear of anger becomes a control technique. Then you realize anger is also like a medication. When I'm feeling angry, I'm not feeling pain. When I'm feeling angry, I'm not feeling my hurt. So if I get angry, I want to quickly go to, or if I get hurt and emotional pain, I quickly want to go to anger because that shuts everything else down. And I don't feel those other emotions. Take that a little bit further. What happens for a lot of people is that they realize early on that there's certain characteristics or emotions that are considered weak. So if I show embarrassment or if I show fear, I get laughed at and picked on. So what you learn to do, as soon as you feel embarrassment, you quickly switch to anger. So I would suspect, and I ask clients this all the time at React, how many of you, when you're embarrassed, within 2 seconds you're angry? And almost everybody puts their hand up. Because you've learned to cover weak emotions with anger so that you don't feel it. Next, for many people growing up in complex trauma, healthy boundaries were not in existence. So you said no to your parents and they didn't care, they just still did what they want. They came into your room, etc. So what children learn or just again know inherently, intrinsically, is I need space. But nobody's giving me space. So how do I create it? Isolate. Well, in a family with people that don't let you isolate, that doesn't work. So option 2, explode. So anger becomes the way of creating boundaries. And the problem with that is that once you get angry, then you feel guilty afterwards. And then you say, sorry, everybody come back in my room and walk all over me. And then you get so tired of that again, you explode again. And you start this yo-yo effect where you're trying to create a boundary but then taking it down. Next one, anger is a great way to hurt people that have hurt us. And so it becomes a weapon. Next one, anger gives us energy. I sometimes ask people, how many of you like to get angry before you clean the house? And they say yes, because now I clean the house and I do a great job because I am angry. And so anger gives you energy. Some people get angry in the morning if they're feeling a bit flat or down or low energy because that gets them going. So it has a purpose there. Others want to stay angry because it keeps their edge. It keeps them sharp. It keeps them alert to danger, to jerks out there. And their fear is if I let my anger die, I might get hurt. I might drop my guard too much. Next one, have you ever noticed when you're angry, you're never wrong in your own eyes? When you're angry, everybody else is wrong and you are Jesus. You are so right. You become Little Miss Self-Righteous, whatever. So what happens with anger, and one of the reasons we like it, is because it allows me to blame everybody else for my problems. And it keeps me from ever having to look at myself honestly. And it creates a feeling that I'm in the right and you're in the wrong. which gives that self-righteous justice feeling. So again, another purpose for anger. Many or most or maybe all of people who have complex trauma who haven't been able to resolve it have reached a point where they go, how do I not get hurt by this person anymore? So their only way to not get hurt is to close their heart shut to that other person. But then the question is, what do I need to enable me to want to close my heart and keep it shut? Turn my anger into a resentment. Because once it's a resentment, I have no trouble closing my heart. And so again, it's a self-protective shield that many people use in order to protect their heart. Another one for many people is it's your identity. I have had clients say that when they were young or in the problem, they were respected because everybody feared their anger. That became their identity. It's what gave them value, prestige, power. And they say, if I let my anger go, who am I? Am I going to end up being a weakling, a softie? I don't know if I can endure that. So that's another purpose. We already talked about it's a way of avoiding looking at yourself. You're always focused on how everybody else has done you wrong. And for many people, that leads to, I don't need help. I'm not going to reach out for help. Everybody else needs help, but I don't. Anger allows you to justify that kind of feeling. So that was quite a few things. I don't know how many you checked. Maybe you were afraid to start that exercise. That was an introduction to anger. So if you know me at all, you know that next week we're going to take it a little deeper. And you're going to get a little bit more self-awareness, which might be more pain and more anger at Tim. Well, I thought for the Christian part tonight, I would give you, what does the Bible say about anger? And I think part of why I want to talk about that is I think if I was to interview all of you, there would be a lot of you that would think the Bible says anger's wrong, anger's a sin, all of those kind of things, because that's often what is taught today by a lot of churches. And so there's a lot of misunderstanding about anger. So I want to take you through mainly the book of Proverbs, which is becoming kind of the wisdom of Solomon guide that we go to for stuff. And I want to show you what he says. But I want to start in the New Testament, the book of Ephesians. It says this: in your anger, do not sin. Now here's what I want you to see from that. He is not saying if you're angry, you're sinning. He's saying that it's possible to be angry and not do anything wrong. So there's anger that is wrong, and there's anger that isn't wrong. He's making that very clear. So what he is saying is this: anger is a powerful emotion, and if you had a crappy childhood, it's going to make you want to do wrong. You can get angry, you just learn how to do right with that anger. Then he says in verse 27, anger gives the devil a foothold. And I think what I want you to hear and what he's getting at with that is this: if you have unresolved anger inside of you, it takes you to a darker and a darker place. It begins to open the door to other behaviors, other thoughts, revenge thoughts, acting out thoughts that could take you to an even worse place. So he is saying be very careful of anger, because if you hang on to anger, you open yourself up to negative forces that you weren't expecting. And they can take you to worse places. And then in verse 32, so this is all in the last few verses of this chapter: get rid of all bitterness, rage, anger, harsh words, and slander. So the word he's using for anger is, again, that lashing out on cruel anger. And he is saying you should be the type of person who is not known because they're angry or harsh or saying hurtful things, but they're marked by a love that people take notice of. So make that your goal. Then in James, and James is considered to be the Proverbs of the New Testament, wisdom stuff. He says this, understand this, my dear brothers and sisters, you must all be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry. Now, what is it that most of us do? We're quick to speak, quick to get angry, and slow to listen. So he says, let's reverse that. Let's start with being quick to listen. And if you're quick to listen, all of a sudden, your anger is going to be less. Your speech is going to be a lot better because you're not going to say a lot of hurtful things. So the starting point is to start listening more than letting your anger make you act out. So again, he then adds this, human anger does not produce the righteousness God desires. So what we said in the first part is this, the original design by God of anger was take you to the righteousness God desires. But what he's saying is human anger takes you to the opposite place. And you need to be very aware that your anger can either be good anger or bad, and watch out for the bad. Okay, now let me take you to Proverbs. And I love this because, again, what you're going to see is that Solomon, in writing Proverbs, had this amazing insight into human nature and into anger. So I'm going to give you a whole slew of verses. You can just follow on. I'll comment as we go to make sure you kind of understand the pieces of what he is saying. But he says, first of all, in chapter 29, fools vent their anger, wise people quietly hold it back. What he is saying this is not that wise people stuff their anger, but wise people learn how to regulate and manage their anger. Fools don't. They just let it out. And they don't care who gets hurt with the shotgun blast of their anger. Then in chapter 19, sensible people control their temper. So again, it's all about emotional regulation. That wisdom brings with it the ability to manage powerful emotions. And anger is one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful emotion. So you don't get real good wisdom until you learn how to manage that powerful emotion called anger. So if you do, you earn respect for managing that. But with that, you learn to pick your battles wisely. And you learn to overlook some things that aren't really a big deal. Whereas an angry person, they get angry about every little thing. And they don't overlook anything because everything accelerates their anger. So a wise person learns what to get angry about, and then to manage their anger. And then in chapter 16, he who is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he who rules his spirit is better than he who takes a city. So what he is describing is mighty soldiers, an army that are able to swoop in with great power and conquer a city. And what he is saying is if you can control anger, you're actually stronger than those men. They've got physical strength, but a person who can control their anger has an emotional strength that exceeds any type of physical strength. So that is what your goal should be. That is what makes you truly great, not physical strength. And then this one is very important for people from complex trauma to think about. Chapter 22. Don't befriend angry people. In other words, put boundaries up. Why? Or next one, don't associate with hot-tempered people, or you will learn to be like them. In other words, you hang around angry people, it's going to rub off. It's going to influence you. But then he goes further, you're going to not just learn to be like them, you endanger your soul. Because once you start going down that road and following these angry people, you are going to do things that hurt others and hurt yourself and hurt your soul. So anger has soul-destroying qualities, but hanging around angry people puts you in danger of having that happen to you. So one purpose for boundaries has to be boundaries with angry people because of the damage that they can do. Next one, a hot-tempered person starts fights. A cool-tempered person stops them, not by stuffing everything and saying, we're done, we're not talking about it, but by resolving them. So in other words, do you want to be a person that just starts fight and leaves everything unresolved so that it just builds this pile of resentments? Or do you want to be a person that knows how to resolve stuff so there's less anger around? And then the next one, people with understanding control their anger. A hot temper shows great foolishness. Now, I told you before that in the book of Proverbs, when it talks about a foolish person, he's talking about a person who lives out of their limbic brain. And guess what what part of the brain anger is all about? Your limbic brain. And anger fires up your limbic brain more powerfully than any other emotion. And so what he is saying is the greatest fools are those who live out of their limbic brain, and the greatest fools are those who live out of an angry limbic brain. So a wise person in the book of Proverbs is a cortex person. So the cortex trumps the limbic part. A fool, the limbic trumps the cortex. So I act out my feelings whether they're hurtful or not. Cortex trumps limbic, says, I'm angry, but I'm going to figure out why, and I'm going to manage how I express it so that it's productive and it brings resolution. So a wise person is from the cortex, and that controls the limbic part. But then he goes further. Not only do they show great foolishness, a peaceful heart or a not angry person leads to a healthy body. Jealousy is like cancer in the bones. So he picks jealousy because it's the greatest form of anger. But what he is saying is anger messes up your health. So that was in the Bible long before scientists figured it out. Is that anger affects your physical health. Next one, chapter 14. Short-tempered people do foolish things. Schemers are hated. The point is this: if you give in to your temper, you always regret it. Because you do stuff that you go, what was I thinking? What a fool I am. And you regret it. And then people don't want to be around you. They develop lack of respect for you, and they begin to hate you. And then the next one, better a dry crust eaten in peace in a house filled with feasting and conflict. And then I got to give you the next one. Better to dwell in a corner of a housetop than in a house shared with a contentious, angry person. In other words, you're better to make a little tent on the roof and live there than live in a great big 4,000 square foot house with an angry person. That's how difficult life becomes when you live with that person. And it affects you. And then it's better to have poverty, a dry crust, but have peace in the home than to have great wealth and nothing but anger. So he is making these beautiful contrasts that say money isn't what gives you the greatest sense of success. It's peace, which is controlling anger. If you get that, then you're going to have the family you always wanted. Then you're going to have the respect that you've been wanting. Then you're going to be the person that is capable of healthy relationships. So if something is more valuable than money and possessions, it's controlling your emotions in a healthy way. Next one, if someone has a hot temper, let him take the consequences. If you get him out of trouble once, you'll have to do it again. Two things I want you to see there. What he is saying is, angry people, after they're angry, say, I'm sorry, I'll never do it again. But if they don't deal with it, they're going to do it again. They're not going to learn from it. Because anger, the next time it's triggered, is going to pull them so quickly in that negative direction they can't stop it. So then what he says is, don't clean up after them. If they do something really stupid, don't lie about it. Don't cover it. Don't try to take their consequences away, because the only thing that will make them be willing to look at their anger and deal with their anger is painful consequences. So don't be cleaning up after angry people. You're only putting yourself into a spot where you're going to do it again and again and again. An angry person starts fights. A hot-tempered person commits all kinds of sins. In other words, anger is an emotion that leads to all kinds of bad things. So it's not just the anger that's the issue. It's all the things that get done while you're angry that are hard to stop and you can't take back and do all the damage. Ecclesiastes, which is about Solomon, we talked about, it says, control your temper, for anger labels you a fool. Have you ever seen an angry person acting out and you roll your eyes and go, how childish, how immature? Okay, very quickly, causes of anger that are given in the Bible. Proverbs, Solomon says, pride leads to conflict. Those who take advice are wise. So what he's saying by pride is the person who thinks they're always right will always be in conflict because they're never willing to look at their own stuff. In their mind, it's always everybody else's fault. So nothing will get resolved, so there'll always be conflict. Secondly, a proud person, you can't teach anything. So they're never going to want to look at themselves honestly. So they're always going to have conflict. Next thing, pride people always put their needs and their desires and their wishes ahead of everybody else. So pride makes you inherently selfish. I want my way more than your way. I demand my way. And when you get a person with that kind of pride, they are always in conflict because they got to step on people to get what they want. They got to use people to get what they want, and they create hurt and conflict. So pride leads to lots of anger. Next one, James 4 says, what is causing the quarrels and fights among you? Don't they come from the evil desires at war within you? Then he explains it. You want what you don't have. So you go, my neighbor got a new car. I want a new car. The new kid got a brand new iPhone. I want a new iPhone. And you become consumed with that. So you want what you don't have. So you scheme and kill to get it. You are jealous of what others have, but you can't get it. So you fight and wage war to take away from them. So envy, selfish desires, always comparing myself to what others have leads to anger. And then there's also in there, it says there's evil desires at war within you. Part of you, when you're having anger going on, is because you're discontent inside. You're just not happy. You're not at peace. Part of you wants to relapse. Part of you wants to stay clean. Part of you wants to act out. Part of you wants to get healthy. Part of you just wants to give up, quit, not think about anything, and medicate everything. Part of you wants to start getting real, and you're conflicted. And then you go to this very dead place because it just feels familiar. And that leads to anger. That internal fighting that happens inside of us. Next one. A gentle answer usually deflects anger. So if somebody lashes out at you, if you lash back, the anger just escalates. If you respond with a gentle answer, often they'll calm down a little bit. Okay? But then it says harsh words make tempers flare. And what is involved in harsh words? Disrespect voiced. How do you trigger a person from complex trauma? You do the things that violated love when they were children. You lie to them, cheat on them, not fair, injustice, and you disrespect them. Those are their four main hottest buttons triggers. And so what Solomon is saying is this: if you want to get anger flaring, just start disrespecting everybody. And that will lead to a very angry household. Next one, jealousy. And what I said earlier, and Solomon shows in Proverbs, that probably the greatest cause or trigger of anger that takes us to the most severe height is jealousy. So he said, anger is cruel and fury is overwhelming. In other words, he's saying anger is massive. It is the greatest, most intense emotion, But who can stand before jealousy? In other words, it just takes it up one more notch. So jealousy takes anger to the highest level. And then jealousy arouses a husband's fury, and he will show no mercy when it comes to revenge. Jealousy can make you act out in super destructive ways. Now, the problem with complex trauma is a lot of jealousy. You want to say the other person's cheating on you, but they're not. It's your own shame. And you're just convinced that if they get to know you, they're going to leave you and find somebody else. So your jealousy isn't based in reality. It's based in the distortions of beliefs that come out of your shame. And so that is something to be working on, because if you don't, you're going to be getting jealous all the time, and each time you do, you're doing damage. And pretty soon the relationship won't be able to recover from it. And then the final one, gossip. As surely as a north wind brings rain, and so in Israeli climate, if the north wind was blowing, it was going to rain. You could count on it. It was a definite given. So, a gossiping tongue, what can you count on? Anger will follow. Just like a north wind, rain follows, gossip, anger follows. You start telling stuff to other people that you should be keeping to yourself. You talk behind people's backs, you're going to have angry people. So that's just 5. Over the next weeks, we're going to look at a lot more triggers of anger. But I thought for tonight I'd give you a taste of the insight the Bible has into why we get angry, what we need to be aware when it comes to looking at our anger and beginning to create in us a deeper commitment to deal with this issue in our lives.